Hi guys, HigheverRains here with another quick lore video. This is in response to an anonymous question that I received regarding Dwarven burials and returning to the stone. The original question was, how do dwarves return to the stone? In the Stolen Throne, they bury the bodies, but in the Descent, didn't they burn the bodies? So to answer this, I will say we have spoilers again for Dragon Age Origins and the Descent DLC of Dragon Age Inquisition, as well as Dragon Age 2's Legacy DLC. If you don't want those spoilers, then do click out now, and I will wait. Alright, so let's start with Dwarven religious mythology, as it was understood prior to the events of the Descent, which is basically fundamental to much of this question. The dwarves believe that they are the children of the stone. We're not sure how long this has been the standard belief, but in Dragon Age Origins you can have a discussion with Brother Burkle, whose goal is to establish a chantry in Orzammar. He claims that this belief is only about 2,000 years old. Of course, we have no other proof than this, so this is certainly not set in stone itself. Prior to this, we have no idea what the dwarves believed, and while that's a fascinating question to explore, it's not entirely relevant to this video. The belief that they are the children of the stone means that dwarves venerate the stone as a mother figure. They refer to the stone as a her, and they believe that they are born of her and ultimately return to her when they die, which is why returning to the stone means someone has died. The stone influences many parts of life as well, though, including stone sense, or the ability of dwarves to navigate underground. Given that stone sense is considered strong in shapers like Valta, and given it also seems to be linked to an ability to find lyrium veins, which of course are evidence of a titan presence, it might be possible to assume that the stone sense is a bit like how mages might be able to sense spirits, or the Fade with their magic. The Dwarven caste system is also linked to this concept of being one with the stone. The paragons, the best of the dwarves, are living ancestors. The higher in caste you are, the grander your link to the stone, and we see this reflected in the burial sites throughout the games. Paragons have entire monuments, such as Paragon Herol, founder of Calarol, or Paragon Hadron, who founded Hadron Tig. If you're wondering why these tags are named after them, it's because part of Paragon's tradition is to take their newly anointed noble house, and anyone who wants to follow them, out into the deep roads to found their own tag, and a tag is basically a dwarven kingdom, so many of them did this. Paragon Caridin, known for his feats of building, did this as well, but the city that he created was actually not one that he ever intended to live in. Caridin created Bunamar, the city of the dead, as a giant mausoleum devoted to the Legion of the Dead in honor of their sacrifices. Bunamar would later become a nesting ground for the Darkspawn, but it actually was not lost until sometime in the Blessed Age, about 50 years prior to the outbreak of the Fifth Blight in Dragon Age Origins, because as a Legion of the Dead stronghold, it was held by the so-called Dead Caste as both a burial site and a temple of sorts. Now, the Legion of the Dead is an interesting case here, because these are dwarves that have sacrificed their lives to battling the Darkspawn in the Deep Roads in exchange for some sort of honour. They are sometimes criminals, sometimes volunteers, sometimes they're nobles in exile. Basically, they're the dwarven equivalent of the Grey Wardens, and it is tradition for the Grey Wardens to serve their final days with the Legion of the Dead as they go on their calling. Each Legionnaire has a funeral prior to the joining where their friends and family get drunk, tell stories, and act like they're already dead, and then the Legionnaire leaves Orzammar and almost never returns. When a dwarf actually dies, there's a rite of sorts. There are traditional words to be spoken, Atras Tunsha, Tutaniam Amgutol Tavashai Duke. These words come from the DA2 Legacy Codex 3rd Legionnaire's journal. Legionnaire Bashath Garin says that he had to say the words to his friends, and he's actually writing them in case someone runs into Prince Tethras. Yes, that's Varric's ancestor, at some point back in the early Exalted Age, so it's a little dated. The best translation that we have for this is, may you always find your way in the dark, and then something about Amgatol, which means duty. So throughout the rest of this, it's a bit difficult to work out. We don't actually have anywhere near a complete linguistic dictionary for Old Dwarven, so it's difficult. The words that Valta speaks over Ren when he dies include this Atras Tunsha. She also calls him Salroka, which means friend.
We must return him to the stone. Atras Tunsha, Salroka. I'll see this through.
It's not an official rite, so I think that we can assume that Atras Tunsha is the important part here. After the rite, the dwarf is actually committed to the stone, either in one of these amazing burial chambers or else in a mausoleum within a stone sarcophagus. In a pinch, they have been known to bury people in the dirt or in cairns covered in rock. The source for this is the First World of Thedas book, page 126, for those of you looking for more information there. The burial in rocks is actually how they end up burying Ren, though he doesn't stay there, as the final mission result is the Descent DLC actually says that his grave was disturbed and his body is missing. That was the mission, A Cry in the Dark. This brings us to the question about the Legionnaires that you find earlier in Descent. The scene in question is actually this.
There's nothing left of them. Can't even tell who they were.
I'm sorry, Ren.
You join the Legion knowing you're already dead. You don't fear the killing blow. We rest in the stone and pass our strength back to her. That's our reward. But the Darkspawn defiled these soldiers. They can't return to the stone. They'd only weaken her.
There must be some way to lay them to rest with honor.
We can burn the remains.
Aye. That's all we can do.
Now, Ren outright says that these bodies have been disfigured to the point it's impossible to tell who they even are, and because of this they cannot return to the stone. There's 2 points I'd like to make here regarding this. The first is that this is reminiscent of the beliefs in ancient Egypt, where great tombs were built for the honored dead and people were buried in sarcophagi with everything that they would need for the afterlife. Ancient Egyptian beliefs stated that in order to be admitted into the afterlife, the god Osiris would have to judge you worthy by weighing your heart against a feather, representing truth and righteousness. If you were a horrible person, you would fail this test and be devoured by a demon. Remember that point, we are going to come back to it. It's important to note at this point that there are theories from anthropologists and scientists that damage to the face of the dead would prohibit them from undergoing this judgment process, thus preventing someone from entering the afterlife in ancient Egypt. This disfiguration would be an act of extreme insult. Regardless of whether the theory actually turns out to be true in our own world, though, there's no reason that this doesn't carry on to Thedas and the dwarves, which is where the second part of this question actually comes in. The Legionnaires have already had a funeral, and now they're living in the deep roads, embraced by the stone as it were, but this disfigurement makes it impossible to honour them, because they do not know who they are. On some level, there's an element of being worthy once again at play here, just like we see across other parts of the Dwarven culture, in everything from their proving fights, where they're literally chosen by the ancestors, or to the caste system itself. At this point, let's return to that point about the unworthy being devoured by a demon in ancient Egyptian beliefs, and this Dwarven belief that people cannot return to the stone if they don't know who they are. Ren says that if they were allowed to return, they would weaken the stone, and what we know of the lore actually backs this up. There are instances of the stone actually having what is called Gangue, which is a real-life waste material that you get in ore mining, but it's also an old Dwarven word for waste or impurities. We see the Gangue mentioned in a couple of places. In Dragon Age Origins, there's a quest called the Gangue Shade, which is completed by collecting an entire set of Legionnaire armor and then wearing it to battle a shade that appears trapped in a relic in the Legion of the Dead temple in Bunamar. There's an accompanying codex which tells us that the Legion of the Dead is actually called upon to face the Gangue, cut into the darkness that afflicts the raw stone. The Gangue is said to have an influence each Legionnaire must face. Our codex from Inquisition on Shades straight up tells us that a shade is a demon in its true form that has adapted to affect the world around it. Now, we know as well that the Gangue can also mean impure spirit of the stone, thanks to a codex entry in one of the tombs of Kalrapatha, which is itself a giant tomb for a paragon, by the way. And we know that demons are corrupted spirits thanks to Dragon Age Inquisition. The very same codex says this: demons bound into rock and Gangue carved into the walls could be translated from Old Dwarven as stone waste or impure spirit of the stone. Dwarven superstition saw demons as impure spirits of rock. These demons are linked to the Veilfire puzzles, where you light the Veilfire torches in the order that makes sense for each part of the story. If you get any of the puzzle out of order when learning the story, the demons are released to attack you. Basically, you are judged unworthy and then set to be devoured. So we know that the concept of the impure demon that's linked to the stone is an actual concept known and understood, and we know there are some similarities between our own ancient Egyptian burial rites and beliefs and the Dwarven ones. We know as well that the dwarves have always valued honour and worth because it permeates their culture. Those Legionnaires could not be buried because they would make the stone weak. They were stripped of their identity, any way to identify them, and thus could not be buried with honour. Without an identity, they were deemed unworthy, and this is why Ren was so upset. Even the lowest caste list can be buried in the dirt, but his men who dedicated themselves to battling the Darkspawn and the impurities that dwelled within the stone could not return to their mother because of the damage that the Darkspawn had done. That's it for me. If you like this video, check out my Tumblr below. I will only be responding to any comments that I get there. Feel free to drop questions into my Ask box if you have any that you'd like an answer to. I'm not limited to only dwarves, though it is kind of nice to give them a bit of time since they seem quite often overlooked as late. And thanks for watching.